First contact with the Forsaken. The Helios research station hung like a metallic spider in the rust-colored atmosphere of Kepler 186f, its solar arrays stretching out against the perpetual sunset. In her observation pod, Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her forehead against the reinforced glass, her dark eyes fixed on the swirling storms below. After 6 months stationed at this frontier outpost, she'd grown accustomed to the planet's eternal twilight, but something about today's atmospheric readings had caught her attention. "Dr. Chen, we're picking up unusual thermal signatures from Sector 7, her AI assistant, Araya, announced, projecting a holographic map of the region. "Pattern suggests biological origin." Sarah straightened, her fatigue forgotten. In 6 months of scanning, they'd found nothing larger than bacterial colonies. "Show me the spectrum analysis." The hologram shifted, revealing heat patterns that pulse with an almost mechanical regularity. Whatever was down there, it wasn't natural to this world. Sarah's heart raced as she processed the implications. "Araya, prep the descent vehicle, and get me Director Walsh." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Director Walsh in his office, the holodata floating between them. The director's weathered face was creased with concern. "You realize what this means, Sarah. Those energy patterns match Zarkath biotech signatures. If they've been experimenting on our research world, all the more reason to investigate," Sarah countered. "The Zarkath abandoned this sector 3 years ago after their failed expansion. Whatever's down there, they left it behind." Walsh rubbed his temples. "That's what worries me. The Zarkath don't abandon anything unless it's either worthless or too dangerous to control." Sarah leaned forward. "James, we've been friends since Academy. You know I wouldn't push this if I didn't think it was important. Whatever's down there might be the key to understanding Zarkath bioengineering. Think of what that could mean for humanity." The director's silence lasted exactly 17 seconds. Sarah counted them. Finally, he nodded. "Take Jensen and Martinez. Full containment protocols. First sign of trouble, you abort." "Clear." Within an hour, Sarah's team was descending through the atmosphere in their reinforced pod. The storm turned their descent into a violent dance, but Martinez's steady hands kept them on course. Through the viewport, Sarah watched as the rocky landscape materialized from the haze. They landed half a kilometer from the heat signature, the pod's legs sinking into the rocky soil. Sarah suited up, checking her helmet seals twice. The atmosphere wasn't toxic, but no one wanted to breathe the metallic-scented air if they could avoid it. "Movement at 2 o'clock, Jensen reported, his rifle trained on a ridge of black rock. "Large mass, maybe 20 meters out." Sarah activated her helmet's enhanced vision, and her breath caught. Through the swirling dust, she saw it, a creature that shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily the size of their descent pod, with an iridescent scaled hide that shifted colors like oil on water. Its body structure reminded her of Earth's extinct theropod dinosaurs, but the similarities ended there. Cybernetic enhancements were visible along its spine and flanks, and what looked like weapon ports were integrated into its shoulders. "Holy shit," Martins whispered over the comm. "Is that what I think it is?" Sarah nodded slowly. "A Nexus beast. I've only seen classified footage. They were supposed to be the Zarkath's ultimate biological weapon, living tanks with integrated plasma weapons and neural enhancement. The project was allegedly abandoned after the specimens proved unstable." The creature turned its head toward them, revealing eyes that glowed with an inner light, not the mindless stare of a weapon, but something terrifyingly intelligent. It made no aggressive moves, but Sarah could see it was injured. Dark fluid leaked from several of its cybernetic ports, and its breathing was labored. "We should put it down," Jensen said, his rifle never wavering. "Standard protocol for abandoned Zarkath bioweapons is immediate termination." Sarah held up her hand. "Wait. Look at its behavior. It's aware of us, but not attacking. And those injuries. Someone tried to deactivate it, but it survived. This could be our only chance to study a functional Nexus beast." The creature took a step forward, and Jensen's finger tightened on the trigger. But Sarah was watching its eyes. There was pain there, yes, but also something else. Recognition, understanding. Dr. Chen, Martinez's voice was tense. There's something else you should see. He pointed to a depression behind the creature. Sarah adjusted her view, and her heart nearly stopped. In the hollow partially hidden by the beast's massive body were three smaller forms. Cubs, or whatever the Zarkath equivalent was. They were barely moving, clearly suffering from the same injuries as the adult. They were trying to weaponize the reproduction process. Sarah breathed. Create self-replicating weapons, but something went wrong. She took a step forward, ignoring Jensen's warning hiss. The beast watched her approach, its head lowering to her level. This close, Sarah could see the incredible complexity of its cybernetic systems, far beyond anything humans had achieved. But it was the eyes that held her, eyes that held pain, fear, and a desperate hope. Sarah reached up and switched her external speakers on. "We're not here to hurt you," she said softly, knowing the creature might not understand the words but hoping it would understand the tone. "Let me help." For a long moment, nothing moved except the swirling dust. Then, slowly, deliberately, the beast lowered its massive head and exposed its neck, the most vulnerable part of its anatomy. It was a gesture of trust that took Sarah's breath away. "Martinez," she said quietly, "get me the medical kit and contact the station. Tell them we're going to need a bigger transport." As she reached out to examine the creature's wounds, Sarah's mind was already racing with implications. The Zarkath had created these beings to be weapons, but they'd created something more, something with intelligence, with emotion, with the capacity for trust. And in doing so, they'd planted the seeds of their own failure. Because some things couldn't be controlled through force or programming. Some things could only be earned through compassion. And that was something humanity understood far better than the Zarkath ever would. The price of compassion. The quarantine bay of Helios Station hummed with tension. Through the reinforced observation window, Director Walsh watched as Dr. Chen worked with the Nexus beast, his frown deepening with each passing hour. The creature barely fit in the station's largest containment area, its iridescent scales reflecting the harsh medical lighting as Sarah treated its cybernetic wounds. "You're turning my research station into an alien veterinary hospital," Walsh said when Sarah finally emerged, peeling off her sterile gloves. "The board is going to have my head for this." Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed from fatigue, but there was an unmistakable excitement in her voice. "James, you need to see this data. The neural complexity in these beings. It's off the charts. The Zarkath didn't just create weapons, they created something that might be smarter than they are." She pulled up a holographic display showing neural scans. "Look at these cognitive patterns. They're not just processing tactical data. They're capable of abstract thinking, complex problem solving, even emotional reasoning. And the cubs." She switched to another scan. "Their neural architecture is still developing. They're learning, adapting. They're not programmed, they're evolving." "Which makes them even more dangerous," Walsh countered. "The Zarkath abandoned them for a reason, Sarah. What happens when those cubs grow up? We'll have 4 living weapons platforms with minds of their own. Or we'll have powerful allies who remember the humans saved them when their creators left them to die." Sarah's voice softened. "I've named her Aurora. The mother. You should see how she cares for her cubs. That wasn't programmed. It's genuine maternal instinct." Walsh raised an eyebrow. "You named it. Sarah, you know the protocols. No emotional attachment to subjects, especially potentially hostile ones." Before Sarah could respond, an alarm blared through the station. "Dr. Chen, quarantine." Araya's voice echoed. "The cubs are showing severe cellular degradation." Sarah sprinted back to quarantine, Walsh close behind. Through the window, they could see Aurora trying to nuzzle her weakening cubs, distressed sounds emanating from her massive frame. The youngest cub was barely moving. The Zarkath built-in kill switches, Sarah realized, her fingers flying over the medical console. Genetic triggers designed to terminate failed specimens. The cubs are too young to fight it off like Aurora did. Then maybe we should let nature take its course, Walsh suggested quietly. It would solve our problem. Sarah whirled on him, her eyes blazing. These are living beings, James. They feel pain, fear, love. Look at her. Really look. Walsh turned to the window. Aurora had gathered her cubs close, her massive body curled around them protectively. Her glowing eyes were fixed on the humans, and in them, Walsh saw something he'd never expected to see in a Zarkath weapon. Pleading, "Help me save them," Sarah said softly. Not for science, not for military advantage, but because it's the right thing to do. Because this is what makes us different from the Zarkath. For a long moment, Walsh stood silent. Finally, he squared his shoulders. What do you need? The next 12 hours were a blur of activity. Sarah's team worked frantically to decode the genetic kill switch while Aurora watched, barely moving except to comfort her cubs. The station's entire medical staff was mobilized, analyzing data and synthesizing treatments. It's like a genetic time bomb, Dr. Patel, their chief geneticist, explained, designed to trigger if the specimens don't meet certain performance metrics. But look, Aurora's system developed antibodies. If we can synthesize those, Sarah was already moving. We'll need a direct genetic sample, which means I have to go in there. That's insane, Walsh protested. In her current state, any perceived threat to her cubs could trigger an aggressive response. She trusts me, Sarah said simply. And before anyone could stop her, she was cycling through the airlock. Aurora's head snapped up as Sarah entered, a low rumble emanating from her chest. Sarah kept her movements slow, deliberate, speaking in soft, calm tones. I know you understand more than you let on, she said. We can save them, but I need your help. Just a small sample. Please. The massive creature studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, Aurora extended one of her injured cybernetic ports toward Sarah. The message was clear. Take what you need. The next few hours were critical. As Sarah's team synthesized the treatment, the cubs grew weaker. The youngest stopped moving entirely, saved only by emergency stasis fields. Aurora never left their side, her quiet keening breaking the hearts of even the most hardened staff members. Finally, at the 36th hour, Sarah administered the treatment. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then the cub's vital signs began to stabilize. The youngest one stirred, then lifted its head. Aurora's joy was palpable, her soft rumbles of contentment echoing through the quarantine bay. You did it, Walsh said quietly, watching through the window as the cubs began to move more strongly. But you realize this is just the beginning. The board will want them terminated. The military will want to study them. Every power in the sector will come crawling once word gets out. Sarah watched as Aurora gently nuzzled her recovering cubs, her iridescent scales shifting in patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as expressions of emotion. Then we'll face it together. Because that's what humans do. We protect those who need protection. We heal what others would destroy. And we find strength in compassion where others see only weakness. Walsh shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. You really believe we can make this work? Harbor living weapons and turn them into allies? Sarah thought of the trust in Aurora's eyes, the intelligence and emotion she'd seen there. I believe we can do better than that, she said. I believe we can show the galaxy that the greatest weapons aren't the ones you control through force. They're the ones you win through trust. As if in response, Aurora raised her head and met Sarah's gaze through the window. In that moment, both human and beast seemed to share an understanding. They were no longer simply savior and saved, but partners in something far more important. They were proving that compassion wasn't weakness, but rather a power that even the mighty Zarkath had failed to comprehend. Breaking protocol. The emergency alert came at 300 station time. Sarah was jolted awake by Aria's urgent voice. Dr. Chen, priority transmission from Earth Command. She stumbled to her console, still groggy, but the message that flashed across her screen instantly cleared her mind. Immediate termination order. All inexus specimens. Compliance mandatory. Military enforcement, En wrote. Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd known this was coming, but not so soon. Her fingers flew across the console, accessing the station's security feeds. Aurora and her cubs were resting peacefully in their quarantine bay, unaware that humanity's bureaucracy had just sentenced them to death. Aria, who else has seen this order? Director Walsh received it simultaneously. He's currently in his office. Sarah was already moving, pulling on her station uniform as she rushed through the corridors. She found Walsh staring out his viewport, a glass of synthetic whiskey untouched on his desk. James, we can't. It's out of my hands, Sarah. His voice was tired, defeated. A Zarkath patrol was detected at the edge of the sector. Earth Command won't risk them finding their failed experiments here. The military transport arrives in 18 hours. 18 hours? Sarah's mind raced. Then we have time. We can prove Aurora's value. Show them what we've learned. They don't want to learn. Walsh slammed his hand on the desk. They want to eliminate a potential threat. And after what we discovered, he pulled up a holographic display showing Aurora's latest neural scans. The Zarkath didn't just create living weapons, Sarah. They created beings capable of linking with and controlling any compatible technology. Imagine what Aurora could do with a starship or a defense network. She would never. You don't know that. None of us do, and that's exactly what Earth Command is afraid of. Sarah studied her old friend's face. You've already made up your mind, haven't you? You're going to help me save them. A ghost of a smile crossed Walsh's weathered features. I'm going to give you a chance to save them. The rest is up to you. He straightened, suddenly all business. The military transport will dock at the main bay. But the maintenance shaft in Section 8 leads to an old mining shuttle. It's not much, but it's untraceable. Sarah's heart pounded. James, they'll court-martial you. Probably, but I've had a good run. He met her eyes. You have 12 hours before I'm officially notified of a containment breach. Make them count. The next hours were a blur of careful preparation. Sarah called in only those she trusted absolutely. Martinez, who owed her his life from a previous expedition. Dr. Patel, who had helped save the cubs. And Chen Lai, their best shuttle pilot. And conveniently, Sarah's younger sister. The hardest part was explaining to Aurora. The massive creature had grown even more intelligent over the weeks, learning to communicate through a combination of gestures and the station's simple interface panels. When Sarah entered the quarantine bay, Aurora immediately sensed something was wrong. We have to leave, Sarah said simply, knowing Aurora would understand the gravity in her voice. Those who created you, they're coming, and my people are afraid. Aurora's scales shifted through patterns of concern, then determination. She gathered her cubs, now strong enough to move on their own, and followed Sarah without hesitation. Trust, freely given, worth more than any weapon. The journey through the maintenance shaft was nerve-wracking. Aurora had to fold her massive frame almost in half, and the cubs kept making curious chirping sounds that echoed through the metal corridors. Every sound made Sarah wince, expecting alarms to blare. They reached the shuttle bay with 4 hours to spare. Chen Lai was already there, running pre-flight checks. The mining shuttle was ugly but sturdy, its cargo hold barely large enough for Aurora and her family. We've got a problem. Martinez called from his lookout position. Military transport just changed course. They're ahead of schedule. Sarah's heart raced. They needed at least an hour for launch preparations. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. Aurora must have sensed their panic. She moved to the shuttle's external access panel, and to everyone's amazement, extended one of her cybernetic interfaces. The shuttle systems suddenly came alive, pre-flight checks completing in seconds. She's optimizing the systems, Chen Lai said in awe. Rewiring for maximum efficiency. I've never seen anything like it. That's why they fear you, Sarah whispered to Aurora. Not because you're a weapon, but because you're beyond their control. The station's proximity alerts began to wail. The military transport was beginning its docking sequence. Go, Martin said firmly, drawing his sidearm. I'll buy you time. We'll all buy you time, Dr. Patel added, moving to join him. Just make it count. Sarah wanted to argue, to find another way. But Aurora's gentle nudge reminded her they were out of options. She hugged her friends quickly, then sprinted for the shuttle's cockpit. The launch was chaos. Alarms blared, radio channels exploded with demands for their surrender, and security teams converged on the bay. But Aurora's modifications had transformed the sluggish mining shuttle into something else entirely. They shot from the bay like a missile, Chen Li's expert piloting and Aurora's technological integration making them nearly impossible to track. As they cleared the station's gravity well, Sarah looked back at the massive creature who had changed everything. Aurora's cubs were huddled against her, but her glowing eyes were fixed on the stars ahead. Not running away, Sarah realized, but running toward something. Toward freedom. Toward a future where beings weren't defined by their creation, but by their choices. Where to? Chen Li asked from the pilot's seat. Sarah smiled. The frontier, where all good stories about breaking the rules begin. Behind them, Hylia Station grew smaller, and with it, the boundaries of what humanity thought was possible. They had chosen compassion over fear, understanding over control. And in doing so, they had proved that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its weapons or its rules, but in its capacity to see beyond them. Aurora's scales rippled with patterns that Sarah now recognized as contentment. Whatever came next, they would face it together, human and beast, savior and saved, each made stronger by the trust they shared. After all, that was the real lesson. True power wasn't in controlling the extraordinary, but in helping it flourish. The Empire returns. 6 months after their escape from Hylia Station, Sarah's unlikely family had made a home in the asteroid belt of the Proxima Centauri system. Their modified mining shuttle, now extensively enhanced by Aurora's technological integration, was docked within a hollowed-out asteroid that served as both shelter and observation post. Sarah watched through the viewport as Aurora taught her cubs to navigate the asteroid field, their bodies gliding through space with impossible grace. The cubs had grown significantly, their cybernetic systems evolving in ways that defied explanation. But more remarkable was their emotional growth. They were playful, curious, and fiercely protective of their human companions. Incoming transmission. Chen Lai called from the communications array. It's encrypted with a Zarkath signature. Sarah's heart stopped. They'd known this day might come, but hoping to avoid it, and facing it were two very different things. Show me. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a Zarkath Imperial commander. Their crystalline exoskeleton gleamed with rank markings, and their multifaceted eyes showed no emotion. Station Beta 7. This is Commander Vexthor of the Imperial Reclamation Fleet. Our scans indicate the presence of Imperial property. Surrender the Nexus specimens immediately. Sarah straightened her shoulders. This is Dr. Sarah Chen. The beings you refer to are not property. They are living, sentient creatures who have chosen to stay with us. Chosen. The commander's translator rendered a sound like breaking glass. Laughter, Sarah realized. They are weapons, Doctor, programmed for combat. Any apparent free will is merely a malfunction we intend to correct. As if in response to the threat, Aurora and her cubs streaked back to the asteroid, their massive forms casting shadows through the viewport. The commander's eyes widened slightly at the sight of them. Fascinating, they said. The specimens have grown beyond projected parameters. All the more reason to reclaim them. You have 1 hour to comply, or we will take them by force. The transmission cut off. Sarah turned to find Aurora already interfacing with their defense systems, her scales rippling with patterns of determination. And was that anger? They're deploying ships, Chen-Lai reported. 5 cruisers, multiple fighter squadrons. We don't stand a chance in direct combat. Sarah smiled grimly. Then it's a good thing we're not planning to fight fair. She turned to Aurora. Are you ready to show them exactly what they failed to understand? Aurora's response was to extend her cybernetic interfaces into multiple systems simultaneously. The asteroid's hidden defense grid, accumulated over months of preparation, hummed to life. But more importantly, the cubs moved into position, each connecting to a different system node. What the Zarkath had never grasped was that their living weapons weren't meant to be solitary combat units. The neural networks they'd engineered had evolved into something far more powerful, a family unit capable of working in perfect synchronization. Multiple ships entering weapons range, Chen-Lai announced. They're charging weapons. Let them come, Sarah said softly. Show them what humanity and its allies can do. The battle that followed would be talked about in whispered tones throughout the sector for years to come. The Zarkath expected to find weakened fugitives. Instead, they found an integrated defense system unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Aurora and her cubs moved as one, their enhanced bodies and minds working in concert with the asteroid systems. While the mother coordinated their overall strategy, each cub controlled a different aspect of their defense. The youngest managed their shield harmonics, the middle child controlled point defense systems, and the eldest coordinated their countermeasures. The Zarkath's first volley was absorbed by shields that shifted frequency faster than their targeting computers could adjust. Their fighters found themselves tangled in gravitational eddies that seemed to predict their every move. And when they tried to hack the asteroid systems, they found themselves facing an intelligence that didn't just counter their attempts. It turned their own systems against them. Impossible. Commander Vexthor's voice crackled through their comms. The neural integration levels. This shouldn't be viable. Because you tried to control them through force, Sarah replied, watching as another cruiser's weapon systems went dark. We gave them choice, trust, love, and they gave us something far more valuable than weapons. They gave us partnership. The battle reached its crescendo when the Zarkath launched their elite boarding units, cybernetically enhanced warriors meant to match the Nexus beasts in combat. They'd breached the asteroid's outer layer only to find themselves facing not just Aurora and her cubs, but the full integration of human ingenuity and Nexus capability. Sarah had spent months working with Aurora to develop non-lethal containment measures. Now those innovations proved their worth. Gravitational fields pinned the boarding parties in place, while targeted electromagnetic pulses disabled their weapons. Aurora herself moved through the corridors like a force of nature, her massive form somehow elegant in the low gravity, neutralizing threats with surgical precision. Stand down, Sarah broadcast to the remaining Zarkath ships. You've lost this fight, and you know it. But more importantly, you've proven something we've suspected all along. The Nexus program failed not because the specimens were flawed, but because your approach was fundamentally wrong. There was a long silence. Then, surprisingly, Commander Vexthor's laughter filled the channel again. But this time, it held a different note. Perhaps, they said slowly, we should discuss terms. It seems we have much to learn about alternative methods of development. As the Zarkath fleet withdrew to a diplomatic distance, Sarah felt Aurora's presence behind her. The massive creature's scales were shifting through patterns she'd never seen before. Pride, satisfaction, and something else. Something that looked remarkably like hope. You know they'll be back, Chen-Lai said quietly. If not to fight, then to study, to understand. Sarah reached up to touch Aurora's scaled hide, feeling the warm hum of her cybernetic systems. Good, she said, because we have a lot to teach them about the power of trust over control, of family over function, and of love over programming. Aurora's responding rumble shook the deck plates, but Sarah understood its meaning perfectly. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't won through superior firepower, but through the willingness to see beyond what others had intended you to be. It was a lesson humanity had learned long ago, and one they were uniquely qualified to share with the galaxy. A new alliance. 1 year after the battle at Proxima Centauri, the asteroid base had transformed. What began as a hidden refuge now served as an unprecedented diplomatic outpost. Sarah stood in the newly constructed observation dome, watching Aurora's cubs, now merely full-grown, demonstrate their abilities to a mixed delegation of human and Zarkath scientists. The youngest cub, whom they'd named Nova, was interfacing with the damaged shuttle systems, repairing complex circuitry with nothing but thought and the precise application of their cybernetic abilities. The Zarkath observer's crystalline forms literally glowed with excitement. Remarkable. First scientist Kelthar commented, their translator struggling to convey their enthusiasm. When we designed the neural interfaces, we never imagined they could evolve to this level of precision. And you say this was achieved without any additional programming. Sarah nodded, hiding her smile. The Zarkath were still struggling to understand that sometimes the absence of control led to the greatest advances. They learned it themselves, through observation and practice, just as any child learns from their parents. Aurora, who had been monitoring the demonstration from nearby, rumbled in agreement. Her scales shifted in a pattern that Sarah now recognized as pride, not just in her cub's abilities, but in how far they'd all come. Director Chen, Aria's voice interrupted. The Earth Command delegation has arrived. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the meeting she'd been both anticipating and dreading. After months of negotiation and demonstration, Earth Command had finally agreed to formally review the Nexus Beast program, not as a military asset, but as a potential partner species. The Earth Command representatives entered the dome, led by a familiar face. "Hello, Sarah," James Walsh said, now wearing an admiral's insignia. "Quite a change from our old research station." Before Sarah could respond, Aurora moved forward, her massive form graceful despite the enclosed space. The Earth Command security detail tensed, but Walsh held up a hand, watching with fascination as Aurora deliberately lowered her head to his level, a gesture of both greeting and reminder of their shared history. "She remembers you," Sarah said softly. "They never forget those who showed them kindness." The demonstration that followed was unlike anything either humanity or the Zarkath had originally envisioned for the Nexus Beasts. Aurora and her cubs showed not their combat capabilities, but their potential for exploration, repair, and protection. They interfaced with damaged systems, navigated complex spatial anomalies, and demonstrated their ability to work in perfect harmony with both organic and mechanical partners. "The neural network we designed for combat," Kelthar observed, "they've adapted it for cooperation instead. Each individual strengthening the whole, yet remaining distinct. Because they were given the freedom to choose," Sarah explained, "to become more than their programming." She turned to Walsh. "That's what we're proposing with the Nexus Integration Initiative. Not weapons, not tools, but partners. Beings who choose to work with us because we chose to trust them first." Walsh studied the family of creatures that had once been considered too dangerous to exist. Nova was now teaching a young Zarkath engineer how to better integrate with their own cybernetic systems. The middle cub, Luna, was coordinating with human pilots to develop new search and rescue protocols. And the eldest, Orion, was working with both species scientists to design new exploration vessels. "The Council will need guarantees," Walsh said finally. "Assurances that this partnership can be managed safely." Aurora's scales rippled with what Sarah now recognized as amusement. The massive creature moved to one of the dome's interface panels and connected briefly. The holographic display came to life, showing footage from their battle with the Zarkath fleet. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "Aurora is suggesting that managing them isn't the point. They've proven they can't be controlled by force, but they can be trusted to make the right choices when given the freedom to choose. Kelthar's crystalline form shimmered, their species equivalent of a thoughtful nod. Perhaps that has been our greatest error. Across all our endeavors, we sought to create perfect weapons when we should have been seeking perfect partners. Walsh watched as Aurora gathered her cubs, their forms creating a living constellation of iridescent scales and glowing cybernetics. In their movements, there was power, yes, but also grace, intelligence, and most importantly, choice. The galaxy is changing, Sarah continued. We're discovering dangers and wonders beyond anything we imagined. We need allies who understand both the organic and the mechanical, who can bridge the gap between what we are and what we might become. As if to emphasize her point, Aurora and her cubs moved into formation, their cybernetic systems linking in harmony. The resulting neural network created a display of light and energy that rippled through the dome, not a show of force, but a demonstration of possibility. Your report mentioned something else, Walsh said quietly, about their reproduction. Sarah nodded. The cubs are fertile, but different from their mother. Each generation seems to be adapting, becoming more stable, more integrated. They're not just surviving. They're evolving into something new, something that combines the best of what the Zarkath created with what humanity nurtured. A new species, Kelthar breathed, born of technology but guided by choice. The implications are exactly why we need to move forward together. Sarah finished. 3 species, each bringing their own strengths. The Zarkath's technological brilliance, humanity's capacity for compassion, and the Nexus Beast's ability to bridge both worlds. Walsh stood silent for a long moment, watching as Nova helped a human technician repair a complex piece of equipment, while Luna coordinated with Zarkath engineers to improve their neural interface designs. Finally, he smiled. You know, he said, when you first brought Aurora to the research station, I thought you were going to get us all killed. Instead, you may have just changed the course of 3 species. He straightened. I'll support the initiative. Not because it's safe, it isn't, but because it's right. As the delegates began discussing details, Sarah felt Aurora's presence behind her. The creature's scales shifted through patterns of contentment, pride, and something newer, hope for the future. Sarah reached up to touch her friend's massive head, remembering that desperate moment in the quarantine bay that seemed so long ago. We did it, she whispered. We showed them that the greatest power isn't in control, but in trust, in choice, in love. Aurora's responding rumble carried through the dome, drawing smiles from humans and causing Zarkath crystals to resonate in harmony. It was a sound of agreement, of family, of belonging. A reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't found in laboratories or weapons programs, but in the simple choice to see the extraordinary in what others had cast aside. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and possibilities, but they would face it together, human, alien, and the beings who bridged both worlds. Not through force or control, but through trust, understanding, and the power of choosing to be more than what others had intended them to be.